All right, pop quiz, everybody. Do you know what this is on your screen right here? Yes, this is a Civil War pension index card, which is telling me there should be an entire pension file for this soldier at the National Archives. But here's the next question. Do you know what this is down here at the bottom of this card? This extra number. So most of the time, these Civil War pension index cards, they don't have this number, but occasionally you will run across one of these numbers. That's when things can get a little bit tricky. The short answer is if you see that number, we might be able to get that file for you at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., but we also might not be able to. That's why I said it can be a little bit tricky. I'm joined here today by my friend and colleague, Alec Ferretti. Alec is a director at a nonprofit called Reclaim the Records, which is dedicated to, and this is his words, cheerfully introducing government agencies to public record laws. And he has experience with helping to track down these files when they're not available in Washington, D.C. So thanks for joining me here, Alec, and thanks for helping us make sense of what may be difficult to understand.
Happy to be here, but I must tell you, there is no sense to be made. We'll try anyway.
Oh, that's not good news. Hopefully we can make some sense of it, but let's see here. So my first question is, when you see a pension index card that has this number at the bottom, an XC number or a C number, what does that mean? Why is that even there?
It means that the veteran or his most likely widow was alive in the 20th century when the modern VA system began. And at that point, these pension files were removed from the Civil War pension file series to the modern VA C file series. Essentially, it's unfortunate for genealogists when someone lived this long, because when the Civil War pension files moved to the National Archives, the XC files didn't. And even if somebody was a Civil War soldier who had been collecting a Civil War pension, if they were alive long enough and it got moved to this newer series, they often got stuck at the VA indefinitely.
Okay. So my understanding has been basically what you said, that it's usually around the 1930 point
Mm-hmm.
is when these changed hands. And if sometimes when the pensioner died, they didn't always make them back to the National Archives, the VA hung on to some of them.
Right. It's not even that they were supposed to. Like, because they'd become XC files, they were no longer Civil War pension files.
Okay.
Um, and, most Civil War soldiers were dead by the 1920s. Not all, for sure. But the more common instances, they have a younger widow. Maybe it's even their second or third wife.
So my experience has been that if the Civil War pension file has an XC number or a C number, it's about a 50-50 chance of it actually being available in Washington, D.C. So kind of a coin flip. Let's say this particular file is not available in Washington, D.C. What do we do next?
So the way the XCs work is that there's a separate retention system for them. And they're supposed to go to the National Archives 60 years after the file is closed, which would mean the death of the longest lived claimant. The problem is that these transfers aren't really happening because the National Archives is so poorly funded that there's no infrastructure to process these records. So basically, if a file was closed before 1955, the file was could have gone to NARA, usually to NARA St. Louis, but even that is not guaranteed. But the thing you want to figure out first is, did the person die before 55? Not the soldier per se, but whoever was claiming. But if the file closed before 55, and we're lucky, it'll likely be at the National Archives in St. Louis.
Okay.
Um, and also, what we want to do is we want to check the VA Master Index on FamilySearch, because that is the modern version of the Civil War Pension Index. So FamilySearch has that online. It's index cards. Ancestry has a transcription of the database, but not the actual cards. And you'll notice the XC number will match the pension file card. Plus, there'll be more information on the card, and it'll kind of just confirm more of what's happening with the file.
Okay. So I have pursued some of these that I have not been able to access in DC. I've looked for them in St. Louis. My experience has been maybe only about a quarter of those are actually there. That's when it can be really difficult. So let's say you've looked for it in DC, you've pursued it in St. Louis, and you've been told no in both cases. So Why don't we do this? Can you give me just like a 2 sentence summary of what the next step is? And then I'll have you expand and give me more details. But just tell me a quick summary about what the next step would be.
So the file is still in the custody of the VA, and you have to make a FOIA request to them, which is the Freedom of Information Act. And the problem is that the VA has started denying these requests, citing like confidentiality grounds, but there's ways around it, which we can discuss.
Okay, so let's go into a little more detail on that, and maybe you can expand on what that really means.
So we have to get the record from the VA, and that is a complicated thing that would take us hours to properly discuss. But basically, the high level summary of this is that the law that created these XC files guaranteed confidentiality to the veterans because of the sensitive nature of what's going to be in the records. However, the implementing regulations that were created back in the 1940s did create ways that people could access the files. So, for example, if you're the next of kin, you have a right under the regulations to ask the VA for your next of kin's file. Separately, there is a prong that's been on the books since the 1940s for genealogists. And essentially, what that meant was if somebody was dead, the VA would give out a copy of the file for historical or genealogical research purposes. And the VA was often too disorganized to actually do it properly. But if you were to yell at them enough, they'd give you a file. And after COVID, there was some money that Congress gave the VA to properly fix the records management. And that was intended to help veterans, but it helped genealogists too, because for the first time ever, starting in about 2022, they actually had a handle on their historic records. And if you were to make a request for a given person's file if they were dead, the VA actually had the infrastructure in place to get it to you. So I got dozens of XC files in the range of 2022, well, like 2024. And that was great because these files are hundreds of pages long, sometimes thousands. The problem is that in 2024, Reclaim the Records, which is obviously seeking to help people get records, we won a lawsuit from the VA where we got one of their indexes to these files called BIRLS. It is an incomplete index. It only indexes the records from 1971 on, which includes plenty of World War I era people, not so much Civil War, because generally the file was closed by the 70s, so it wouldn't be active in the system. There's always exceptions. So anyway, when we got BIRLS, we made a website, birls.org, that allows people to search the index. And then we built in a system to make a request for a given person's file that was automatically sent to the VA on your behalf. In response to this, there were 20,000 requests submitted by genealogists for their relatives' XC files. The VA responded by saying, we don't want to do that. And they looked at their rules and figured out how they could have some lawyers sign off on changing their policy to no longer give out the files. So instead of providing the full file, they now, if you're a genealogist, all they do is they give you a little summary that's probably AI generated of the veteran's name, date of birth, date of death, and parents' names. And they often are unable to even provide that information because their AI tools aren't that good. So they'll generally, basically, you end up with a form letter giving information that you already knew and likely provided with the request itself. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's basically what happens. So for all intents and purposes, if you request a file from the VA, you're going to get back nothing. Their lawyers would frame it in court more nuanced than that, but that's functionally what happens.
So I was hoping and expecting the answer would be like you've filed a Freedom of Information Act request and they process it and you get it sent to you and you all live happily ever after. You're saying that's not the case now.
No longer. So in 2024, that was the case. I got hundreds of files. But in 2025, they've decided to now invoke this confidentiality statute to severely limit what genealogists get. Now, again, what they would say is that, no, we're not doing that. We always gave out these records pursuant to our regulations. Previously, we gave out the full file. Now we're just giving out a genealogical summary of the information we deem important. And we really have to do a whole textual analysis of all these different statutes and regs to understand the specifics of that. But that's basically what happened. If you go to our website, birls.org/updates, we explain this in more depth. Where we
how do you spell that? Can you spell that out?
BIRLS.org/updates.
Okay.
Which is, again, BIRLS is their database that they actually have.
What does BIRLS stand for?
I always forget. It's the
Okay.
Beneficiary Information Record Locator System, I believe.
Okay.
It is the digital equivalent to the VA Master Index. So we
Okay.
have the Civil War pension cards in the 1800s, the VA Master Index. There's a World War I series online, a World War II series at NARA St. Louis. The World War II series actually covers Vietnam as well, but it cuts off in 1971 because they stopped having index cards in 71 and everything was into a born digital database. So that is what we sued the VA for back in 2018 and got a copy of. The
Okay.
master indexes are already at NARIS. Those are publicly available in the first place.
So is there any hope? Because this happens a lot. People will ask me to get this Civil War pension file. I cannot get it in DC. They go and request it in St. Louis and they get a no from there too. Is there any hope for these people getting these Civil War pension files? Or is it like, what do we do about this?
So there is hope. So under these regulations, there's a couple of different regs, and our Reclaim the Records page cites all this. So again, feel free to read this yourselves. But basically, there is a genealogy prong of access, which is what they're now using to deny you functionally. There's a separate next of kin prong of access. Now, the problem is when we make the FOIA requests, we don't actually cite what our prong of access is because the VA never asked for that. So historically, the VA just got a request and they'd give you the record. They didn't care if it was your dad or your friend or a celebrity. I got Art Carney's XC file the same way you might get your deceased father's XC file. I asked for it. I cited the name. They gave it to me. That was all that mattered. They still, on their official forms, do not have a relationship question, nor are you citing any prong of access. So the VA officially has no mechanism to even know why you're requesting. However, they've essentially said to their employees, if you think they're doing it for genealogy, assign them the genealogy prong and then give them no records, which is really problematic because most people who aren't lunatics like me are requesting their next of kin's records, or at least something very close to that.
Mhm.
You're getting your dad, your grandpa, your uncle, your great grandfather. Most of you aren't hiring Brian to find random celebrities XC files. Um, so if you're a next of kin, you should still have access. Now, the problem with this is that, first of all, how do we actually invoke that? There's no formal way to do that. But even more than that, next of kin is sort of meaningless legally. Different states and different statutes would have different ways of defining it, but the VA has no legal definition of what next of kin means. So if you want your great grandfather's file, is he your next of kin? Well, the VA might say yes, the VA might say no. There's not really any legal standard on which we could decide this. So basically, what this means in practice is when you want to file, what you want to do is you need to make a FOIA request to the VA. You use their official form on the VA website. It is hold on, the VBA-20-10206. Again, that's the VBA form 20-10206, which is their form to request a file. And again, it doesn't actually ask for a relationship. It just asks for your name and the person's name. So in theory, anyone who's ever getting any file fills out this form, and the VA has no way to know, are you getting your dad's for his burial flag or are you getting a celebrity? Like there's no actual way to do this. So they potentially may refuse to ever treat any Civil War soldier's file as an next of kin request. I just don't know.
Is
Um,
there any hope of them relaxing their policies anytime soon?
no. Um, However, their policies are never actually followed most of the time. So even if their policy were to officially be no Civil War files for veterans or for next of kin, half the time they're going to not follow the policy. So what my recommendation is to fill out the official form, make the request, include a letter saying you're requesting this record pursuant to X regulation, which on the BIRLS site we can, it shows you. Give proof of relationship, proof of death. If you can cite any kind of legal reason why you need it, please do so. It's kind of hard most of the time, but I have a client or I have a friend who's working on his Canadian citizenship application, and he's actually using a Civil War pension file to prove something. Actually, I think he might have hired you, Brian, to get that for him. But anyway, he's trying to prove something from a Civil War pension file to actually claim a legal right. Now, this is at NARA, so it's not the same situation, But like, if you actually had a legal reason to need the file, cite that if you can. Otherwise, just say you're next of kin. You don't actually need a reason. And the VA might send you the file. Since this policy went into effect last year, I have gotten a number of files just erroneously. So
Okay.
people are getting files.
Are there links on the Reclaim the Records website that will help people in this process?
Yeah. So the BIRLS.org/updates is the website to go to, where it explains all the different, the thing they're doing.
Okay.
So we've explained the whole situation there.
Okay. So, Alec, we're going to wrap this up, but if people have more questions about this process, what can they contact you? What do they do next?
Yeah, so the problem is that because we're playing Calvin ball, there's no real rules. So I can't help you too much. If you email me, I'm happy to answer your question if I can. But like ultimately, everything I've said in the last year to people has been there's no rules. Make a request, try your best and see what happens. If somebody wishes to hire me to do it for them, they could. But like other than doing the things I just said you should do and handling those exact same things, I have no abilities you don't have because there's no actual rules anymore.
Okay.
The real solution is suing them, which is very expensive.
Okay. So if they did have questions, should they go to the website or how do they find
They
you?
can email me.
Okay.
My email address is ancestorarchivist@gmail.com. Feel free to email me.
Okay. That works. So, all right. Thanks so much, Alec. This helped answer some of my questions as well because I wasn't sure when they're not in St. Louis what to do next. And wasn't the news I was hoping for, but at least we have an answer now. So thanks for coming on and helping us out.
My pleasure.